Oh, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. It's one of a series of webinars organised by the Environment Centre NT, and it's sort of a focus of knowing about and maintaining biodiversity NT. When we set out to run these webinars, a major focus was the natural wonders of the NT, and we haven't lost this focus. However, we've realised pretty quickly that looking after these natural wonders led us to thoughts and questions about how this could be achieved. And so reflecting this, today's webinar has a focus on the issue of Gamba grass, which is a major threat to ecosystems in the NT. I'm Dave Liddle. I volunteer my time with the Environment Centre, and I'm very pleased this afternoon to have the opportunity to engage in the discussion. This webinar today is actually a follow-on from a webinar we produced, I guess must be 18 months or so ago now, about Gamba grass. And I refer people to that webinar if you're after a bit more information about, I guess, some of the aspects of Gamba grass, and particularly Gamba grass in the top end. I guess the focus of today is actually updating what's happened since then, rather than recovering that same ground. And in that time period, there's actually been some really major things happening, particularly in regards of a weed management plan for Gamba grass was adopted under territory legislation in December 2020. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward today to hearing a bit of an update particularly about that weed management program. All right, so today we've got a great panel of expertise with us. I mean, these people have been involved in Gamba grass for many years, and particularly been very active in the last last couple of years. We've got Roni Opden from the NT Weeds branch, who will focus on sort of an update on what's been happening under the Gamba Management Plan and the annual report. Rowena, who's been very active with Gamba Army and working for TNRM, will talk about what's been happening there. Susanne's also from TNRM and will focus on Gamba in Kakadu and West Arnhem. Most important for all this Gamba activity has actually been the community support. And so we've got Pauline from Gamba Grass Roots. We'll give an update about what Gamba Grass Roots have been up to. And of course, most important is also the research that goes on. Not quite so much in the forefront of public arena, but Natalie Rossiter-Rachor from Darwin University is going to provide a quick update on some of the research activities that have been happening. Most of what I've referred to so far has actually been activities in the NT, but there's also some bigger picture things happening. And so we've had a threatened species plan put out by the Commonwealth government, which actually lists includes Gamba as an issue, which it's really, I guess, a recognition at the national level that Gamba is such an important issue and needs to be addressed, which adds an extra dimension to what's been happening in the territory. And then where that will lead us to then is a panel discussion and response to questions and comments. Yeah, here we are, our friend or foe, whatever, of Gamba. Look, I just want to say very briefly why Gamba is important. Again, I'll refer back to that previous webinar if you want more detail on that. But in essence, Gamba is an introduced species from Africa. It's a very aggressive grass. It's very, very successful in the NT, and will just absolutely dominate landscapes. I mean, it's in the process of rewriting our landscape. So we're going to lose our savannas, our mix of woodland and grassland on the trajectory, if left unchecked, would actually become a grassland, which has huge biodiversity implications, but it also has huge implications in all sorts of other things, livelihoods of people, cultural sites, recreational activities. And there's been lots of publications. I guess I've already made reference to the work that Natalie's done in terms of research. You can actually go search on what Natalie's published, and there's a whole lot of really great publications from CDU about Gamba grass. This particular one that I just wanted to highlight was actually something that came from the community end of the spectrum, and it came from Gamba Grass Roots, And as you can see, the title is Counting for Costs, the Economic Impacts of Gamba Grass and the NT, and appropriately there's a picture of fire on the front. But look, this is a really good source of information. It has some great illustrations in it about changing fuel loads and changing fire intensity. Look, one of the fantastic changes that has been in the last couple of years is availability of information. And so this is a map taken out of the Gamba Grass annual report. This map at the top end, the red dots are Gamba Grass occurrence. The squares are 50-kilometre grid cells, and so you can sort of start evaluating the top end in terms of where Gamba is, and what's really important about this sort of information is that it'll actually give us the chance to see how things have changed. We've actually got two management zones. There's the area around Darwin, which is all those big red dots. Well, it's a black outline on that map and a concentration of red dots, so that's a management area. And then outside of that, for the rest of the territory, it's an eradication zone. Just to touch briefly onto the weed management plans itself. The weed management plan actually is very much taking a strategic approach to managing Gamba in the top end. And I guess the point that I want to make is that actually it's not any individual group. So it's not industry, it's not government, it's not landowners, it's not the community. It actually needs everybody in together to make this work. Look, a really key stakeholder of this activity on Gamba is actually the NT government and the weeds management branch within the NT government. So at this stage, I'd like to hand it over to Roni, who's from the weed management branch, to actually provide us an update on what's been happening under the weed management plan, and also to tell us about the annual report. So Roni, if I can pass it across to you, please.
Thanks, Dave. I was saying earlier, look, I could talk all day on so many aspects of Gamba. I could talk about, how to control it, what we're doing in the compliance space, what kind of education and awareness programs we're running. Today, just to keep this brief, I'm going to screen share with you and run through specifically what this 10-year plan sets us up for, and what commitments we've made, and how we've travelled in the last couple of years. As Dave said, the plan was introduced in late 2020. It's a 10-year plan. So thank you for the introduction, Dave. I am Roni Opden. I'm currently the manager of the Gamba Fire Mitigation Unit, which is an initiative of the Department of Environment, Parks and Water Security. We're a new unit, and we bring together the functions of the Weeds Branch and Bushfires NT when it comes to the management of Gamba. We deliver awareness programs, and we also encourage compliance with both the Weeds Act and also the Bushfires Act when it comes to Gamba, particularly with high fuel loads in the rural area. We also deliver the Fire Ready Week, which was held just recently, which is an awareness program, and also Fire Ready Assistance, which delivers extra support for landholders in the rural area who might be elderly or vulnerable and struggling to look after Gamba on their properties. Just for today, I'm representing the Weeds Branch, and I'm just going to give an update against the 5 key goals of the Gamba Grass plan. The plan was released in 2020. It's a statutory document, which means that it establishes the legal requirements for all landholders, including government, and particularly focused at people who own land and manage land. But there are actions just for everybody. The plan was put together with the collaboration of the Weeds Advisory Committee, which is a statutory committee, and we're represented by a few members here today. So the plan outlines the minimum requirements for landholders based on the size of their property and also where they live. But it also has a whole section on strategic actions that'll be undertaken by government, by stakeholders, by community, which will actually see us make a difference in the next 10 years. One of the actions in this plan is that we will deliver an annual report. So we have, last year in 2021, the Weed Advisory Committee endorsed the release of the Gamba Grass annual report. And this report, publicly available, addresses all of the actions from the Gamba Grass Management Plan. The first report was released late 2021, but it covers all the actions in the first 6 months of the plan. So December 2020 until June 2021. Before we go into the highlights against each of the 5 goals, we just have a quick look at the strategic management of Gamba in the NT. So we've got the largest and the most dense infestations of Gamba are throughout the Darwin rural region, stretching down to Kamali, Adelaide River. In these areas where it's very heavy, the feasibility of eradication is very low. This area is called the Class B zone, and it stretches down to the Catherine Township. And in these areas, we manage Gamba grass with a focus on reducing impact, particularly in relation to bushfires. Once we get beyond the Catherine region, Gamba grass infestations tend to be smaller, more scattered and isolated. And then in this area, it's considered that Gamba can be eradicated. So this is classed as a Class A zone, which is for eradication. Over time, over the next 10 years, the Weeds Branch will review the boundaries of the AB zone so that where we're having success of eradicating, we can actually start to shrink those boundaries and then capture more of the NT in the eradication area. That'll be a reflection of success for us. So goal one, the number one priority in any weed management program is to get the outliers first and keep your clean areas clean. In the A zone, the Weeds Branch has developed a mapping and monitoring program, along with a register to track progress of Gamba control on every single property in that area. All of the properties in the Class A zone have been contacted over the last 12 months and asked to provide a status report that says whether Gamba is present or absent on that land. That's going to help us fill in that map and get more confidence about where we're putting our efforts. The response from the landholders has been really good. It's meant that we've learned of some new areas that might have Gamba that we didn't know about previously. But we can also confirm that some areas on the map have now been eradicated. So they may have been on the map for 10, 15, 20 years. We're now getting confirmation on some of those that they've been eradicated. So over time, with reviews of this plan, we'll be able to redo these maps on a frequent basis and show actually where we're having success. So this will allow us to target strategic outbreaks as well, rather than simply looking all over the top end for those isolated plants. In the next annual report, there'll be an update of this map, and we're going to focus on showing where the clean areas are so that we can make sure they're protected. The second goal in the plan is to actively manage the Gamba in the control zone. Like I said, we do this with a real focus on reducing bushfire risk and reducing community tension where neighbouring properties have different management regimes that affect each other. The Gamba plan does spell out the exact specific requirements for each property. Depending on whether you're a large property, you may need a 15-metre buffer put around to prevent spread and impact. Smaller properties under 3 hectares must eradicate Gamba grass with a deadline of July 2023. So we're going to ramp up in those areas too. Each year we're committed to inspecting 1,100 properties. And we focus on high risk areas where there's a lot of Gamba grass and a lot of people living. Last season we did 1,300 properties. So we just do as many as we can. The score system we use to measure compliance is based on 7 different criteria, and each of those criteria equals a score up to 20, with 20 being the worst of those properties. That allows us to target where we put our effort, particularly with our compliance effort. Look, last season we issued 267 orders, and out of that, 77 of those improved, and those who don't do significant action towards getting on track can be fined, and the fines are just under $400. So then we can use some of these properties we've been looking at over a period of time, say 3 to 5 years, looking at the same property and scoring it in the same way. So we can use those scores now to start looking at trends. We can look at different areas where we're getting a lot of community participation, and we can look at other areas that just need a lot more attention and more targeted attention. For example, we found that last year, on average, of all the properties that we intervened and gave instruction to, we found that we had an average of a 4-point improvement out of 20. So we're using figures to see what our risk is out there and how it's looking. and how our programs are working. Goal 3 in the plan is about protecting priority assets. There's a specific focus on environmental and cultural assets, and one of the actions is actually to develop a list of key environmental and cultural assets that's going to be made public. The WAC has already done some workshopping on this, and we've got a public survey inviting input. It's going to open up in May this year, and we've got an aim of priority asset list being publicly available by January 2023. When we do identify priority assets, they are incorporated into regional weed management strategies and also stakeholder land management programs. So when we talk environment and cultural assets, we're talking things like sites of conservation significance, watercourses, and community value areas, examples such as Arnhemland, and also heavily populated rural areas. So they then get adopted into operational work programs to ensure that we are taking action to protect assets. Probably one of, apart from environmental cultural, one of the highest assets at risk of Gamba impact is life and property. The bushfires that we see in the dry season are just extreme, they're intense, they're fast, they're hot, they're very difficult to fight. We focus a lot on this when we're doing our compliance inspections, just because it's so urgent. Last season, out of 1,300 properties that we looked at, 15% of these had Gamba that grew right up to their house or to infrastructure, whether that's a shed or a caravan. That's one of our criteria that we really prioritise. And what we were able to do as we left the wet season and entered the dry season, we had a list of 56 specific properties that we felt that people were at risk in the bushfire season. So we referred them to whether it was Bushfires NT or the Fire and Rescue Service, and they were able to put them on their radar, either to intervene with their own legislation or simply to just be aware that if there was a fire in that region, they may need to address those areas first. Goal 4 is about increasing the community capacity to manage Gamba and also participation in the programs that are running. We do have a lot has been done in the space of community capacity and raising willingness to participate. Along with the WAC, the Weeds branch has developed a pretty comprehensive communications plan, which covers a range of different programs we have in place to engage and educate. A few of these things are plucked straight out of the statutory plan, the Gamba plan. So I'm just going to give a quick update. For public reporting, we have an app called NT Weedmate. It does get a lot of hits, but it's particularly useful for weed contractors. So it can collect a lot of data and it comes to us as a spatial layers. We're taking feedback from the WAC members and also the community. We're trialling an online reporting system just for Gamba Grass so that the public have a really simple way to just make a report on the spot, being a one-off without having to download an app and sign up. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We hope to have that up and running for the dry season, which is when we get a lot of reports about Gamba. That's when a lot of concern starts to come up. I'm just going to touch quickly on the Gamba Management Framework, which is it's a holistic look at all the collaborative partnerships we have going to deliver on the Gamba plan. So they include things like the Weed Advisory Committee, which is driving a lot of what we're doing now. The Gamba Army, who looks at coordinated on-ground Gamba control. The Gamba Action Program, which is an annual program providing support for the community to manage Gamba, and partnerships with Lichfield, Charles Darwin University, particularly with a focus mapping in Lichfield Park. There are other collaborative projects that aren't mentioned in the Gamba plan that are worth mentioning, and things like Territory Natural Resource Management's aerial surveys of Kakadu and the boundaries, and also Casuarina Coastal Reserve Land Care Group, who work with NT Parks and Wildlife. And just finally, look, we're always on the lookout to improve the best practice advice that is available for Gamba Grass, and there's a big call for modernising how we provide advice. And we all know that spraying long-term is not sustainable. There needs to be a range of management options, and landholders are looking for a range of integrated control methods. So the Weeds Branch is liaising with the Australian government, looking to produce a national Gamba Grass best practice manual. And there will be an update on that in our next annual report. Not likely that the best practice manual will be complete in 6 months, but there's already a lot of work going on. And I've recently visited Darwin to engage and chat with local people. So there's a lot more work to be done in that space as well. The final goal in the Gamba plan is focused on making sure that we are delivering transparent compliance, maintaining our monitoring programs, and reporting back to the community on how we go. If you feel in the mood, check out the NTG Gamba website. It contains links to the Gamba plan. It has a discussion paper on the plan. It has the Gamba Plan annual report, and it also has an annual snapshot, which covers all of the strategic actions that are being undertaken to address Gamba grass, including those that we've covered under the Gamba Plan as well. We've got a new online tool, which is called Check Your Gamba Risk. That went live in April 2021. It had 161 views in its first 3 months, and it's a fantastic online tool. I use it to do education in the schools and to demonstrate to the community how we assess properties. So it's a self-assessment tool. It's based on the 7 compliance criteria that we use to assess property risk scores, that score out of 20. Once landholders tick the boxes, it gives them a score, but it also takes them to advice on what they can do to manage the issues that they may have ticked on those boxes. So it's a way for people to understand why they may be at risk, why we may be getting in touch with them, and what to do about it. So we're going to continue monitoring and reporting progress against the Gamba plan. The reports initially were due every year in July. They include, if you check out the annual report, it has all the stats of the inspections we've done, how many people participated in the herbicide programs, how many community events. In the past, the very first year, getting this annual report out was a little late, and maybe reflects the fact that there was a lot to be done in the Gamba plan. Happy to talk more about that. There was a lot to be done, and putting that first report together, there was a little bit of back and forth on, having an online version versus a document, and then there were design, conversations about colours and fonts and things like that. It was a little late getting out. Going forward, that review will start in May this year, and there will be an online public input survey open, so the public can also look at what we're doing and say how they think we're going. And the communications plan has revised the public release. We're expecting it in by September. So we'll all be contributing into this next annual report. It's going to be a really good one. It'll be the first one that we've had a full year of monitoring and reporting. So the Weed Advisory Committee, a Gamba Weed Advisory Committee, this is the first time we've ever had a targeted committee just for a species, and it's been absolutely brilliant. Initially, they were compiled to help to develop the plan, and it's definitely been agreed to retain the committee and also to grow the committee. We want to keep this Gamba Advisory Committee to keep momentum of everything that we're going, and the input is just so varied. We have now have 10 members on the committee, and they represent such a broad range of groups and organisations. So look, if you're not comfortable to give your feedback to the Weeds Branch, you can give your feedback to any of the committee members who are representing interests that you may have and areas that you may be interested in. There is a lot being done. This is really just what's captured in the Gamba plan, and I can't wait to hear from the rest of you, because there's a lot of good work being done.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Roni. It was a great update. Obviously, lots and lots of things going on. I just noticed one of the things you mentioned about the the National Gamba Management Manual. And I see that Matt Schunan has posted there that it will be available by the end of the year or early next year at the latest. So given that that's coming from one of the people who's working on actually putting that together at a national scene, then that's good news. Okay, so if we can, I guess, step from that bigger overarching perspective of the weed management plan, that very strategic approach to it all, and actually focus down on one of the really big things that's happened, well, for a couple of years now, is actually all the work by Gamba Army.
The Gamba Army. So here we are, 2020-21 wet season. Northern Territory Government, in acknowledgement, decided, $500,000 to help fund Gamba Army. In response that we know that Gamba's habitat transforming species, that it's a risk to assets, both biodiversity, people, natural, man-made assets. So the last season, job creation, in response to these displaced COVID workers, let's get them out there spraying Gamba grass instead. Also with job creation, there's, we wanted on-ground outcomes. Where could we actually get best bang for buck and make sure we made a difference and hit priority areas and valid areas that we could get some outcomes? And did it sit with the overall Gamba grass framework? So we did liaison with Weed Management Branch. So this little talk is a little bit about the Gamba Army. What did we achieve last year, 2021? And from that, there are quite a few lessons learnt. And now, exciting, with the announcement recently of future funding, another $500,000 for the Gamba Army for the 2021-22 wet season. So we're just starting now to look at our priorities and initiatives for next season. So this will be basically what my talk's about, is what did we achieve and where are we going? Slide 2. So the first lessons learned and the first things we need to do is really where to pick your battlefields. Where do we deploy this army? It was very important that it complemented existing land manager control efforts, and that basically the army was putting additional workforce into priority areas. And the key priorities at the start were conservation areas such as the 3 national parks, Charles Darwin National Park, Casuarina Coastal Reserve, and actually Litchfield National Park. These were in conjunction with high amenity use. We also started looking at other areas that were impacting adjoining tenures. So we liaised with Department of Infrastructure, Planning and Logistics, DIPL, and the Crown Land Weed and Fire Officer, Kelly, on where should the Gamba Army be deployed to minimise impact on adjoining tenures, and where could we get leverage with existing investment. So where either NTG were putting investment, roads, Crown Land, could be Australian Government, Defence puts in significant investment, private people, even Aboriginal communities. So we looked at where did we need to go and put our Gamba Army. Involved engagement with obviously the relevant land managers who owned those parcels. And did I mention, again, exciting, NTG's now committed another $500,000 for the upcoming wet season. So as I said, the first priority where the Gamba Army, the first block we went into, and some of that was because it had been recently burnt, so you had really good green leaf regenerating, was Casuarina Coastal Reserve. And this was seen as a bit of a no-brainer, high amenity use, high public awareness. This is one of the lessons learnt and raised awareness with, you cannot just do one block or site in isolation if you're getting impacted by adjoining tenures. So Casuarina Coastal Reserve, as on this slide, is in blue. You'll see, for an example, those orange squiggles, that's one of the reserve blocks. They're the track logs that us guys out spraying, we tracked where we went, took photo monitoring sites. That was where we tracked over a few days in early December. But the other point, that's actually the hospital block, and that's managed by Department of Health, but it's got that top left, huge infestation of Gamba. It's non-managed and obviously keeps reinfesting Casuarina. So we needed to look at that whole cross tenure, and that also includes the Defence Housing Authority block that adjoins the hospital block and Casuarina Coastal Reserve. And there's a nice drone image of the hospital block that we're looking at that change in Gamba over time. So a really important lesson, we need to consider cross tenure. So example that these are some of the photos of the changes at Casuarina, and it also reinforces one of the other points that we need to consider spraying in conjunction with the interactions with burning. Yeah, and so there's been some quite interesting, like whether it burns post-spraying or pre-spraying, on really what happens to the native species and the ecology happening there. So parks actually burnt Casuarina Coastal Reserve. This is on the 6th of May. Ideally, it would have been great to say that we should be looking also at some earlier or through the wet season burns, that then we can spray and still maintain ground cover on the ground, reduce the risk of erosion. And then Litchfield National Park, another really significant priority for Gamba Army. We focused on the high priority areas for eradication between Bully Rockhole and Florence Falls. Lots of backpack work, but I have to admit it's not the worst country to be walking around carrying backpacks, although it was a bit of a slog for some of the people. But you can see in that slide, you know, we found some isolated plants in the middle of otherwise non-disturbed native species, so it was really important to get those individual plants to avoid sort of subsequent spread. In the other park, Charles Darwin National Park, this is quite a good case study too on what happens with Gamba grass over time. Again, high valued asset close to Darwin City, really good wilderness, you know, serenity area, just 5 k's within the Darwin City. Another example, you know, these were the track logs of where the teams were spraying. Example there of all the mountain bike tracks in there, that it's a really widely used and valued asset. So a good example of where the Gamba Army could go in and help support the work of parks. Charles Darwin, there's also been work done in there for considerable time, so it provides a good case study of the importance really of doing follow-up work, and that is why it was actually quite a relief to get follow-up funding for this year, because otherwise the issue is like, man, we did all that work over 2020, 2021, geez, we've got to do the follow-up work, or where will we be in a few years' time? So these pictures actually illustrate from March 2016, dense, thick Gamba in the park was sprayed by both parks and actually dorks, Darwin off-road cyclists, the mountain bikers as volunteers. Then we got wildfire through, then we got, with no follow-up work, Gamba then came back as reinfestated. Then Gamba Army came in 2021 season, and there were some natives regenerating, but we're actually starting to make a difference and see all the natives coming back. And so there are areas that you actually can get wins, that Gamba grass can be eliminated. See, I've used the word eliminated, not eradicated, because eradicated is a really serious weed management term. But that consistent follow-up is essential. And so did I mention the NTG has committed a further 500 thou? So the first priority is to make sure follow-up work is conducted across all the sites from last season. Well, that's priority 1. And these pictures actually then also show from really dense Gamba infestations in the park over time that we've got back to a clean native habitat with no introduction of other seeds, just nature coming back itself. Really important though, that interaction with fire, and try and keep fire out. So apart from the parks and conservation areas, then we started looking at other sites the Gamba Army could go. Sorry, we're up to slide 9. Other sites, this example, the Aviation Museum. So land management's not their core business, obviously. They were like, you know, what do we do? They've got some volunteers come in and slash some of the areas. But this was a block that sat as a high Gamba grass level in between. The Met Bureau sits to the west, has very little, if no, Gamba on it. Obviously, the airport and defence have a significant investment and control their Gamba, like my old mate there with the big slasher in the corner. And you can see in the block, that's a defence at the background, clear of Gamba, and the Aviation Museum still has its thick Gamba in the foreground. And then there's some before and after shots. You might recognise the big red tower at the end of Hook Road there. So this was an example where we wanted that it was impacting across tenures and helped out basically a community type group. Also examples say roadsides that weren't being necessarily managed as part of any existing contracts. particularly where roads are going into a clean area, and that question on how to prioritise to keep clean areas clean, and how do we minimise those disturbances, and industries such as extractive industries, roadworks, Telstra towers, power, water, etc. That you have the two really key, that you have disturbance, and then there are also avenues for distribution. So Gamba Army conducted the roadsides, that's the roadside spraying into some of the extractive sites. But it does say, how do we get the extractive industries, those on board as well, to make sure that those areas are kept tidy. We also did say Howard Springs, which included pine forest, there's a forestry block, and again, because it borders onto Howard Springs Conservation Reserve, so we needed to do the tenures that adjoin on an area that's making a concerted effort for Gamba grass control. And the pine forest really widely used by local communities. That shows some before and after on some of the tracks. And the drone image there, that actually shows where the first round contractors went in. So that was a contracting employed through the Gamba Army. They did the buffers, and then TNRM Gamba Army went in and filled in the green bits in between. And the bottom picture shows an extractive area. The Gamba's the green, that really this would have been taken drone imagery April, May. The Gamba really stands out amidst all the native species that by then are starting to hang off. So slide 12. This another example shows the cross tenure issues. I called it Lambroli. That's the intersection of Lambrick Avenue and Zuccoli. The roads contract obviously does on the road verge. There's then Crown land internally, and it also then abuts actually onto Palmerston Council land. But the line down the middle is this totally arbitrary line that goes through a whole patch of native scrub and Gamba grass, and yet you're like, stop, change in tenure, pull up. So it really needs to be managed, say, as a combined block for better synergies and cost effectiveness. So really, we did over 30 sites across more than 50 land parcels, because a lot of the parcels that we did actually had combination of, as I said, of tenures in it. And this just shows all the sites that we did across Darwin. Yeah, we can find that on the TNRM website, but then they're just some of the examples of other places that we went. And so where we go in the future and where we didn't, Gamba Army probably wasn't utilised the previous wet season, are some of the roadside areas that it is part of an already existing contract, but there's some isolated patches that would probably be really important to pull up. So the strengths of the Gamba Army, that we could do this cross-tenure stuff. So we treated more than 30 sites across 50 different land parcels or tenures, encompassing more than approximately 7,000 hectares. And that cross-tenure thing's important because it means, that the bucket of money doesn't sit with a specific agency. So Crown does, will say, well, that's not our land, so we're not going to do that, because we've actually got to make sure that we, make sure we do our land and our obligations. So really important strength of the Army. And that's really agile, that for a scope of works, if we identified a site and they were like, yep, that could still getting done, say, example, Glendower Road that adjoins near Robinson Barracks, that I could write a scope of works on the Monday, get it approved, get it out to a contractor for some quotes by Tuesday or Wednesday. Contractor comes back with the quotes. We accept the winning contract, and the contractor can be on the ground on Saturday. Be really difficult to try and get that sort of agility with lots of other agencies. So we did use more than 6 different contractors as small businesses to help deliver as a component of the Gamba Army, as well as the TNRM team within the Gamba Army. And that Gamba grass was the key focus. So it meant that is all the Gamba Army did, surprisingly. That's why they're called the Gamba Army. So we didn't get called away to go and manage, dogs that were running down the beach, or even by April, May, some of the other land managers, Defence, for example, even parks, they've started shifting their focus towards fire management, which makes sense. But we could keep spraying into June. So it meant we could get all these outliers, all the native species had hayed off, so we were getting very minimal collateral damage with spraying at that time of the year. So, our efficiencies on ground weren't diluted by trying to manage other land management type issues. Obviously, we employed probably more than 40 workers as part of the Army, so great for capacity building, had a lot of students from CDU, so they certainly got their practical experience out spraying, and even within some of the government and different agencies that they're like, oh, okay, that's how we can improve our management, or that we would help them and then they could carry on more with that work. Our quick spray units are currently in getting service ready for the next season, so it sort of shows then the Army also supported local business and the economy. There's one of our contractors, Practical Land Management, out spraying those drains at Charles Darwin. So when you're driving down Tiger Brennan, you see those drains sprayed, good job, contractor and Gamba Army. A little bit on physiology with timing of spraying, won't go into this a lot, but it really, the timing when you spray, the interaction with burning and with slashing, really important for your effectiveness of your outcomes and getting this elimination of Gamba grass. So I sort of paralleled it. There's no label actually with Gamba grass on it, herbicide label, so paralleled it with some other similar species to Gamba grass. So the future, did I mention there's another $500,000 for Gamba spraying this 2021-22 wet season. So the priorities are obviously the follow-up work on all these sites. The next thing is into these new areas, so where do we go? We've started liaison with land managers already to say, where are your current contractors, where are your priorities going to be, where is the Gamba Army going to best fit? So really it's about how do we use all the money that's getting sprayed, who's already getting paid for Gamba grass control, how do we use it more effectively? So even within tenure, so example Litchfield National Park, like where would we treat Gamba for our best bang for buck? You know, that it's such a huge problem, like where do we start? And that could be using aerial application over some of the bulk areas, or it could be we go back in with backpacks or on ground to tidy up pre-existing areas. So we'll continue that prioritisation over the next couple of months before we really crank in with the on-ground work once it starts raining. And again, that cross tenure to make sure that we do across a geographic block, that we're not restricted by like who actually owns that land or whose tenure it is. And where it sits with the overall Gamba framework, with Weed Management Branch and with the range of agencies and stakeholders, you know, maybe this involves that we develop a bit of a scope for a Gamba grass, a weed management plan for the Darwin region. So we prioritise, you know, do we keep pushing back the Gamba, say at Hidden Valley, so all the work at Charles Darwin, that, you know, you don't get reinfestation. So we start looking at that's a Gamba management at a region level.
So Rowena, could we just please spend just a couple of minutes highlighting what's happened this current wet season? And I guess you've talked about scope for refinement. What particular refinements have you been able to bring to it?
So I suppose following on from that presentation, as I outlined, the really crucial bit for this year was to ensure follow-up work was done on all the blocks from last year. And we'll say both last year and this season that the Gamba Army will do blocks. It certainly comes into our consideration on areas that there is at least some process or commitment by that land manager to ensure that subsequent work gets done, just in case the Gamba Army doesn't get refunded again, or that the Gamba Army could move on to other areas and that land manager can, you know, the Gamba Army's tried to put on the front foot and now they should be able to pick up the slack. So say for parks, and I encourage anyone to go for a walk, say in the west side of Charles Darwin National Park, that it is actually, you know, the Gamba grass has nearly been eliminated from that side. We've got zero tolerance of any Gamba on that side now. We're still working on the east side. But, you know, there's increased nesting sites, birds, etc., to see a type of change that you can get. And then parks now, they're like, oh, that's great. You know, you guys have cracked the back of it, that now parks can pick up some of that, you know, that they're at a level that they should be able to get it as a maintenance versus management level on some of those sites. And the same with Casuarina Coastal Reserve. I'm going to put it out there, and certainly in assistance with Dave and the Casuarina Land Care Group and the Gamba Army and the Adoptaspot, that I think we can eliminate Gamba Grass from Casuarina Coastal Reserve. Like, big call, but I think Department of Health have come on, Defence Housing, and so there is actually active Gamba management on all those tenures that have joined Casuarina Coastal Reserve. Looks heaps different, and there's a link to a report on the TNRM site that shows that change at Casuarina Coastal Reserve as well. And some of the other areas that we're looking at, even some of the shooting ranges, that one of the shooting organisations, they've actually got a funding grant that they've bought their own quick spray unit, but they're at they're like, oh my goodness, it's so extensive. So the Gamba Army will go in, give it a bit of a crack, because we know then that those agencies, the land manager there, the go-kart racing, the mud cart, if you're driving down Tiger Brennan Drive, hopefully you'll see how much we've smashed of that this year. And the guys on those, the caretakers, they've been now helping and doing the follow-up work. The follow-up, and that we've identified new sites that we're doing, and we'll do a report and put it on the TNRM website. When I spend a bit of time in the office and not out just killing the stuff.
Well done. The balance between out there killing it versus administering it. I'm very heartened to hear you talk about elimination from Casuarina Coastal Reserve. I agree. I think it's quite feasible to do that, but it'll take another year, a little bit of time, but it's on the cards, which is just a fantastic. It'll be a fantastic outcome when it happens, because it just represents, input by all sorts of people, Gamba Army, parks, volunteers, lots of people, and then across land tenures as well. So yes, I very much look forward to that, although there's still obviously a bit of effort required. Perhaps if we move on to our next speaker, who's Susanne. So Susanne, if I can hand it over to you, please.
Hi everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to give this little presentation, which is a Gamba Grass project update for our West Arnhem project. So Territory Natural Resource Management has been funded by the National Landcare Program to run a 5-year project focused on protecting West Arnhemland and Kakadu from invasive species and threatening processes. And very early in the project, we've identified Gamba Grass as one of those threatening processes. So this is the distribution of Gamba Grass across the top end, and I've just put on there also in orange where the legislative control zone for Gamba Grass is, which is Zone B. We'll call it Zone B. Now the thing about West Arnhemland is that it's directly to the east, and there's Kakadu in there as well, and so we're just outside of that control zone where there's not a lot of Gamba Grass, and this area all outside we call the A zone, the eradication zone, where theoretically any Gamba Grass that's in that area is a target of eradication, and groups need to work together to make sure that there's no Gamba Grass persisting in that area. So our project is focused over about 9 million hectares, which is a fair bit of land, and there's a lot of Aboriginal land in that area. There's land managed by Darwin Ranges, by Watakan, by Mimal, Arafura Swamp Ranges. We've also got land managed by Barwanunga, by Adjamal Ranges, and there's ranger groups within Kakadu as well who are focused on managing Gamba Grass. There's Myanmar Ranges as well. So there's many, many different ranger groups doing their very best to keep Gamba Grass out of this West Arnhem area. Kakadu's had a couple of areas they've had focus on for a number of years, decades actually. Mudjimbury, which would be near Jabiru, and Jimmet, which is down near the South Alligator towards the bottom of the park. Both have got their own challenges. Both are hard to access all of the plants before plant seed. Ground stays too damp, vehicles will get bogged or can't get across river crossings to get there to access on ground. This year, Jabiru Rangers have tried to combat that using aerial drop-ins, so carrying their backpack sprayers with them and getting dropped in by helicopter to patches and then treating those patches by ground and working through sort of a prioritisation of patches. And those patches were detected through the aerial survey last year and then got put into a management plan. So that's the northern area. Down in the south, the Werribee Rangers and the Rangers from Mary River District are working at Gimbat, but there's a lot of feral animal pressure there and plants stay very short. So again, it's a little bit difficult to get optimum treatment timing. The South Alligator can be hard to cross from the ground. So plants are already not in growing phase by the time rangers can get there. And that's probably one of the reasons that infestation has persisted as well for 20 odd years or so. So those rangers also will be focused on detecting any new plants, and that means checking campgrounds, noticing things on roadsides. One of the interesting areas is down in the south of Kakadu, where Mary River divides the control zone, the B zone, from the eradication zone, the A zone. And as there is quite a bit of Gamba grass in the pastoral area next door to Kakadu there, TNRM are quite interested to find out, is that Gamba grass passively spreading onto Kakadu? So an aerial survey just recently in May 2021 really tried to examine that, and transects were flown across both sides of the river from the headwaters travelling down towards the coast, and that was quite interesting because it detected hardly any Gamba grass within a 4 kilometre proximity of the river, and not a lot of what I would call passive spread. Plants have not moved a great deal under their own steam, but where plants were present, it was quite clear that they were next to tracks or fence lines, or some means of human-assisted spread had got those plants to that location. The western border of Kakadu is right up against the control zone for Gamba grass. There is Gamba grass growing on pastoral properties, and there's been Gamba grass in that area for a long time. There were even trials, I think, in the Port Stewart area quite some time ago, so Gamba's been there a long time. And that Gamba grass seems to have a risk of entry into Kakadu, but our surveys have pretty much shown that the passive spread is low risk, and that the real risk of entry is through human-assisted pathways. People will carry seeds, so visitors, tourists, contractors, musterers carrying seeds on vehicle and equipment. And then disturbance is another factor which facilitates Gamba entry and spread, but often the disturbance is actually caused by people. So burning or clearing vegetation or turning over soil and making Gamba grass easy to take hold, a lot of those things happen because of people. So again, that's following the human-assisted pathway of spread. The one thing that rangers could probably focus on is the detectability side of it. We know that there's a lot of space out there and not always that many eyes on the ground. So where those high-risk entry areas are, that's where attention needs to be focused. And that might mean, checking fence lines. It might mean checking those boundary areas every couple of seasons to really understand if anything's happening there. And then focusing on those places where people are coming in and new infrastructure is going in, and musterers are coming in, putting in yards and things like that. So very targeted patrolling, I guess, to be able to help with the risk of detectability, helping Gamba grass spread into Arnhemland. Pathways of Gamba grass spread for Western and Central Arnhemland. We're looking at the Arnhem Highway, we're looking at the Kakadu Highway, we're looking at the Central Road, and we're looking at the gravel pits along those roads where once a seed might come in and a little infestation started, then within that area those seeds might be getting collected and moved around a little bit more locally. So those are the places that we like rangers to really focus on checking. We like contractors to have, we like to have good contractors in place to be doing follow-up in those road corridors, and part of that is around data collection, so that if Gamba grass is noted, there's coordinates associated with it and it can be followed up. There are some surprises and some non-surprises, I guess, with Gamba grass. We know in West Arnhemland that there's a couple of points in Kakadu that are long-term infestations. We know that there's pathways of spread, so high risk, we expect things to come up where people have been moving through the landscape. But sometimes there are surprises, and we certainly had one in the early stages of the project where when we went looking, using the helicopter. We went looking to see whether we could detect Gamba grass along some of the river crossings along the Arnhem Highway, and the helicopter pilot said, hey, you need to go and look at those Telstra towers. So went over to the Telstra towers, and the Gamba grass that was growing in the Sandy Creek compound, it could have been there 10 years. There's so much that it's spread through the fence, it's under the solar panels, it's starting to go off into the bush. Now, whether that's come at some point with a contractor doing maintenance or with the actual infrastructure being installed, it's hard to tell. But either way, it's somewhere where nobody had thought to look, nobody had thought to put that into a work plan to go and address. Now that rangers are aware, they're definitely trying to get there a couple of times a year to make sure that plants are treated and there's no new seeds going to the seed bank. But that surprise came from only looking at 5 towers, and there's many, many, many towers across the top end in the eradication zone. So it's one of those things. I think it should be prioritised where possible. Groups should be checking tower compounds, and any areas of infrastructure that they haven't checked for a few seasons really should be high priority if they can possibly get there at all. So the Sandy Creek towers close up towards Merganella out on the way to Coburg, and the rangers have been now prioritising getting up there a couple of times a year to check it out and make sure that there's no seeding gamba. A couple of the factors that are increasing the likelihood of gamba grass spread in Western Arnhemland and Central Arnhemland are frequent burning and Section 19 contractors. And I think that these aren't altogether unrelated. Frequent burning really creates suitable habitat for gamba grass spread. It loves disturbance. It loves to have the competition removed from other plants. So areas that do get burnt frequently are always going to be highest risk for gamba grass spread should gamba grass be present already. That's one issue. With Section 19s, it gets very unclear sometimes as to who holds the responsibility for weed management. So if weed seeds come in through mustering, or weed seeds come in through some land use, then who manages those weeds and the infestations that pop up from there? Could it be that rangers manage those, but a certain amount of fee-for-service should get built in to the Section 19? Perhaps that's one way it's done. Perhaps the Section 19 licence holder is responsible for the weed management. But just at this point, it's not clear. And it would be great if it could become clearer in the future, I think. Then resourcing could go to the right place to make sure that, gamba grass isn't being spread. Now, to keep gamba grass out is something that requires quite a few strategies. And here are some of the strategies that Territory Natural Resource Management have really focused on. We've even gone as far as to put these strategies into a poster plan called the Regional Management Plan for Western Arnhemland and Kakadu, with a focus on gamba grass prevention. So the strategies, or probably the top 4 strategies, are really involve as many people as possible and get those people to look for gamba grass before that gamba grass gets established. So we're talking about when a seed comes in, that seed might come in along a roadway, it might come in with infrastructure development or equipment brought with contractors, and then that seed falls to the ground and starts germinating and growing into a plant as conditions allow. Probably a wet season starts to get it going. So we really want people to be aware that gamba grass starts to germinate in wet season, and that's a really good time to keep your eye out and look for it. So we've been working with rangers to use a GPS, mark any gamba grass that they notice, take a photo of it that's got location recorded on their phone or some other way of making sure we know where it is, reporting it, and then getting that followed up so it turns into a part of a work plan where rangers will go back to that location, especially if that plant had seeded, and then the next year treat again, look for new seedlings coming up, pull them up, or if they're too large, apply some herbicide, try and make sure that that site gets checked until it's eradicated again. There's actually a lot of kilometres of road to be checked. We've had rangers working together each year to treat maybe around 1,000 kilometres of road, and those are roadways with gravel pits along the side of them. Gravel pits get used in road work, new equipment, new contractors, new maintenance vehicles come in, and they might be bringing new seeds with them. So every couple of years, those gravel pits really need to be checked to make sure that there's no plants that have germinated and started to seed and become little infestations in those gravel pits. And as well as that, random plants just do pop up on the side of the road. Perhaps they've knocked off a vehicle as it bumped along. Particularly creek crossings seem to be a spot where Gamba grass seeds have come off vehicles and started to cause little infestations. Then, as well as the road patrols, we've been getting into the air, where we really need to have a better look if there's a larger area to get over. There's been aerial surveys over parts of Kakadu and parts of Kakadu boundary where the control zone for Gamba grass, the B zone, butts up against the eradication zone, or the A zone for Gamba grass. And we really want to understand what's happening where those zones meet together, and is there risk of Gamba grass moving out of those B zones into the eradication zones. So aerial surveys in the last 12 months or so have covered over about 130,000 hectares. And then what happens after that is that where Gamba grass has been detected, we can get that included in a work plan. Here are some examples of how groups go about reporting and recording what's going on. Some groups can really methodically collect information about every gravel pit that they visited and what they saw there. Another way to do it is to take photos of what they've been treating to show the change. Also, being able to record latitudes and longitudes with photos, so that the next person who comes along to treat the Gamba grass in that location has got all the data that they need to be able to get back there. And all this recording and reporting is important, because if we don't have that documented, when a new ranger coordinator comes in, they're not going to be aware of some of the work that's taken place beforehand necessarily, and they're not necessarily going to know where does that follow-up need to occur, where is there potentially an infestation that's about to get going if nobody goes back to check. Slide 9. Here's just another example. This is some of Darwin's work in their bat dreaming cultural area, which is just off the highway as you approach Catherine. And with their fulcrum app, they'll record different work locations. There can be a photo that goes with that. And so then we can put that together in a little bit of a map just to keep as a record, so that people can see what's been taking place where. Slide 10. As well as straight out treating, one of the focuses we have is on awareness raising. So awareness raising is really around getting land managers to understand better what they're looking for. Not everybody knows what Gamba grass looks like. There's not a lot of it in Arnhemland, which is fantastic, but they do need to be able to detect it if it is there. So working with Weeds Branch, working off the back of VET units in Ranger Ready training. So when participants are coming together already to learn about how to apply chemicals, try and include some weed identification sessions with maybe plant samples, Weeds Branch reps to come out and talk to people about this is what you're looking for and here's what to do if you see it. Weed hygiene is also really important, so understanding what are some strategies for making sure vehicles don't carry weeds, and really getting people involved in part of their vehicle checks so that they understand, you know, here's where the risk could be, here's what I need to do to reduce the risk that my group has when they move around that landscape and operate in that landscape. We've also focused a bit more widely across the region with just a publicity program called Stop Gamba Grass in Its Tracks, and the idea of that program is that it's about making the broader community more aware, people who might be tourists, visitors, people who don't spend a lot of time in Arnhemland, but people who potentially could be bringing seeds from Greater Darwin area as they travel, or people who might be visiting places and noticing a plant out of place, and then really encouraging them to report that so that the right ranger groups, the right people find out that it's there and understand what, where the risks are and how to follow up on that. A key thing for our organisation is to make sure that many people are involved, because as with almost anything with a regional focus, it's only as strong as the absence of the gaps in the program, and we really would love to have all stakeholders involved working together as neighbours. This means making sure that we can support all groups. Some groups might need support with data collection, some might need funds to help them with surveys or to help them just to get some fee for service, perhaps, to be able to cover more kilometres. Also with understanding how do we monitor, how do we measure whether we're getting some improvements with our work, is our work making a difference? So we try and work with each group to understand where their biggest Gamba risks and issues are and work out how we can best support them. The bottom line for us is we want more stakeholders to take more responsibility. Groups are doing the best that they can. They're undertaking the awareness raising, they're trying to communicate to their outstations and to their traditional owners. They're really trying to make sure that people are aware of this weed and that it's important that it gets treated. But as well as that, there's some conversations that we're trying to have with other visitors to the land, whether it's mustering contractors or whether it's to do with infrastructure development. Anybody who moves into West Arnhem Land is actually carrying a real risk of Gamba grass spread, and it would be wonderful if there'd be a way to build a little bit more, perhaps a levy or some component of weed management planning and follow up to just help those ranger groups be able to put resources towards checking areas where there've been new fences, new roads, musterers have come in, people have been working around the landscape. How to report Gamba? So if you see Gamba grass in the eradication zone, let us know. Take a photo of the infestation with your phone. Make sure you've got your location information on, which you can do by turning it on in your gallery settings. Text us the photo or email it through. We've got our best contact as info@territorynrm.org.au. There's even a phone number, 0438 756 481. We would love to know where that Gamba grass is so we can make sure it gets into a follow-up program. This project is supported by Territory Natural Resource Management through funding from the Australian Government's National Landcare Program. Thanks to many stakeholders and ranger groups and organisations, there are many, many people working really hard to protect West Arnhem Land and Kakadu from Gamba grass, and I think that there's some fantastic achievements that are being made every year, and I look forward to seeing what's about to happen next year. Hi Dave, did you want me to just give a 1 minute update on that? Yeah, so the Mudgeonberry site that the Jurubi Rangers have been working on, we did our second year just recently at the start of March of accessing those sites with backpack spray, getting dropped in by helicopter, and we borrowed a couple of the other TNRM Gamba guys here, which meant that we could get a lot done. So that was really successful. And rangers are super happy with what got achieved last year and the fact that those patches are quite contained. They don't have a lot of recruitment, and I do wonder if that's to do with the fact that they do April burning. So that's positive. I think we're just ramping up now to get contracts in place for fee for service for different groups to be checking road corridors and creek crossings and the same old. But one thing I do think is that there's just getting into the work plan is critical, and so independently of the West Arnhem area, I've had other groups sort of approaching and saying, can we get a plan in place? Can we just have a document or something that's got a map and it's got some strategies and it's got some things that pin us down to what we have to do in these different locations, just to make sure that nothing goes unchecked and we're able to get on top of the little bit that we do have. So there's definitely, that does seem to be something that people will prioritise, but they still need something to work off.
Yeah, okay. So that's, yeah, I guess clear indication of where to put some energy from here in terms of getting those recommendations into work plans. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what a great story, and how just so important in that eradication zone to actually be addressing what are currently these small outbreaks. There's important outliers. There
is something I think that needs to be explored around the April burning, because a lot of the Aboriginal land areas with Gamba, it looks like the Gamba isn't spreading in the same way that that's indicated, say, by the Litchfield surveys and so on that Nat's got the data for. And I do think that maybe that April burning does some different interaction with the grass. And I know so at the Gamba forum, which we've got scheduled for April 10th, I know Jamie Page is talking about wet season burning, and it's something that I think needs to be explored more, perhaps. So that's sort of the direction I'm trying to look into in terms of research gaps. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, given the time when Gamba seeds, then that's not terribly surprising if an April fire has quite a different impact from something, fire a couple of months later. But yeah, and I guess this is where we've got to go, where people, well, one of the directions to go is where people make these observations and actually to examine those a bit more closely. So yeah, excellent. All right, well, thank you very much for that. Look, I'd like to move on next to actually hear from a community representative on our panel today. With Gamba Grassroots being represented by Pauline. So Pauline, perhaps if I can bring you on to tell us the story from Gamba Grassroots perspective.
Gamba Grassroots is a community group. We're passionate about our community and environment. And we believe that we're at the core of solving the Gamba issue by working to empower communities to create change and take Gamba on action on Gamba grass. So this year we encouraged our supporters to successfully campaign the Gamba Army to be funded for their second year. And we're hoping that we will have the same success for the Gamba Army's third year. Gamba Grassroots disseminates the latest Gamba information. We do that through conversations, events, newsletters, Facebook stalls, attending other people's events and participating there and getting our supporters to participate. We also engage with politicians, encourage our community members to also participate with politicians and agencies and organisations to help garner more support for Gamba action. We also encourage people to comment on Gamba related plans as required. And this year we won the prestigious Invasive Species Council's 2022 Frogget Award, and we've been nominated and shortlisted for the upcoming Territory NRM's 2021 NT Landcare Award in the Landcare Community Group category. So that's all very exciting, and we pride ourselves on connecting the dots for community, highlighting the risks and actions required, and encouraging that there's more work done in the Gamba arena, and as does everybody else who's participating in today's panel. So recently we're becoming focused on securing federal support for Gamba action while retaining our partisan position, and we've been getting positive responses to our federal focus from politicians across the spectrum over the last few months, which is good to hear. And we've also had our supporters and community members making contact with candidates and federal representatives requesting more Gamba support to help reduce the fire risks and protect lives. We've teamed up with the Invasive Species Council in this, in our seeking of federal assistance. And the things that we're asking for is a $1.9 million per year over 4 years to create additional full-time Gamba Army coordinators and on-the-ground jobs. And we're also requesting $550,000 per year over 4 years to support contractor positions through Aboriginal ranger groups and Parks Australia. And it will mean that there'll be more jobs in Northern Australia in globally significant northern savannas and places like Kakadu National Park. It will also prevent catastrophic fire risks to communities, agricultural and tourism assets, And if we act early, we can help to prevent the spread of gamba across Northern Australia into far north Queensland and the Kimberley. There's also the benefit of reducing gamba to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enable more Aboriginal communities and pastoralists to participate in carbon offsetting schemes that are jeopardised by gamba infestations. So more locally, the Gamba Action Program needs more funding to provide free herbicide to residents of the top end. The Gamba Action Program, it started in 2010. It's an amazing program. It's really great. It's administered by the NT Weeds Management Branch, and they receive $100,000 in annual funding to purchase the herbicide with. Now, that amount has not changed for many, many years. And with the $100,000, it's not going as far now as it has in the past. So herbicide prices have increased dramatically. Then it now costs 3 times as much to buy a drum of herbicide as it did last year. And that means that with less herbicide in the GAP program, less landholders can access the free herbicide to manage their gamba, and many of those landholders will be unable to afford to buy herbicide to manage their gamba. So that potentially leads to properties not having their gamba managed due to financial hardship. And of course, going into this year, besides trying to get support for more funding for the Gamba Action Program, we're also going to be focusing on more assistance and renewed funding for the Gamba Army to continue the amazing work that they do. And we know that early intervention works. Western Australia has recently announced that they're on the cusp of eradicating gamba from the Kimberleys. So if we get on top of it and stay on top of it, we too have great hope of getting rid of gamba. So what can people do to help? Join Gamba Grassroots. We've got a Facebook page, we've got a website, and we will send out newsletters. We won't spam people's emails, but we do send out newsletters when there's news to share. People can join the Environment Centre or a local land care group. And if you see gamba, put it out. I mean, that's the most basic way people can help. Other things we're encouraging people to do is to meet, to phone or email their federal election candidates, their local member of parliament, or speak to their local councillors and just ask for more gamba action. And all the photos used in this slide were taken in the last 12 months of different people in the community interacting with each other and with politicians to try to garner that support and that funding. And towards that, I'd like to thank everyone that has played a role in getting us this far in the gamba fight. We've come a long way, attitudes have changed and improved, and if we keep it up, you know, it's a battle we can win, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Yeah, wow, what a range of things going on. Yeah, let's hope the funding applications at the federal level are particularly fruitful in the endeavour. And Natalie, a chance for you to talk about some of the research that's been happening, please.
So just giving a really quick update. So as you know, we've spent many years researching Gamba grass to better understand the biology of Gamba grass and also to better understand the impacts. So particularly looking at fire and the impacts of fire and the ecological impacts that fire has. So in recent years, we've been looking at how we might reduce some of these impacts. So particularly looking at if we reduce Gamba grass fire frequency, what might the implications of that be? So, are we seeing, an increase in tree cover? And so the work that we've done, particularly at Mary River National Park, has shown that reducing that fire frequency is really helpful for increasing savanna tree health. And even in areas that have been invaded for a long time, that we reducing that fire frequency can actually help native tree species start to regenerate. We've also in the recent year started some mapping in Litchfield National Park, looking at the distribution and the density of Gamba. We're hoping to finish that mapping this year, so we've got some more mapping to do. And we also have been contributing to the best practice management manual. So Matt Sheehan, who's on the group chat today, so working with Matt and a range of other people that are in this group today to input our research into that best practice management manual. And finally, just of note, one other thing that's occurred in the last couple of months is the release of the Threatened Species Strategy Action Plan. So I'm not sure if you've seen that or not, but that strategy is available online, released by the federal government. And that strategy it's a 5-year plan to reduce the threat to threatened species. And the three threats that were identified were feral cats and foxes, Gamba grass, and myrtle rust. So that's a significant thing to have Gamba grass included in that group, and I'm sure that will inform management actions in years to come. So that's my 2-minute rundown of the recent research. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Natalie, I think one of the things that really jumps out to me is actually the range of speakers we've had today, and it comes back to that comment that I made early on about that Gamba grass is not just an issue for one segment of the community. So it's not just the community, it's not just landholders, it's not just the government, it's not just industry. It actually involves requires effort by all sorts of people, all sorts of stakeholders, all sorts of interest groups. And to me, it's one of the fantastic things that we've seen with under the banner of the weed management plan, and all these efforts by all sorts of different people. And no individual group, it won't work without an individual group. I mean, without the efforts of Gamba Grassroots, who have lobbied for funding for Gamba Army. That sure, lots of other people push for Gamba Army as well. So no credit goes down to one individual group, but it's that combined effort by lots of people, which is just so important. Look, we don't have a great deal of time for questions this afternoon, but I guess perhaps if I can throw at least one question to each of the people on the panel, is what's actually a key thing that we've learned in the last couple of years?
Look, I'm just blown away by pretty much repeating what you said, by the collaboration of stakeholders who all have an interest, and so many people now on the right track. That's what I've really experienced in the last 12 months.
I've learned that there's still a lot of people who don't know how to identify Gamba grass, so we still need lots of public education.
Yeah, public education's ongoing, yeah.
What do you think's the best way, Therese? Because there are a phenomenal amount of resources, but how are we not reaching people?
I don't know. Do we need an ad campaign on television with catchy jingle? I don't know how people can't know what it looks like by now, but there's a lot who don't.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I just got
just
today of cane grass, and luckily they had a picture of the seed, so and the flowers, so you could easily go, no, that's not. Here, look at this picture of Gamba seeds and so on. But I agree, and I think one of the issues is that even if we're banging on about Gamba, nobody's teaching people what the native stuff looks like, so they actually don't have a reference point.
The Weeds branch is pretty close to producing a grass ID booklet where they've lined up the key grasses that look like gamba, and have honed right in on exactly what the difference is, stem, seed, leaf. We'll try and make a big deal of that when it comes out.
I think that's the trick, Roni, is getting it out so you're not just preaching to the converted.
Oh, I was just going to say to time, because Gamba grass is most distinguishable in about end of May. And so if you make a really obvious release then, you say, you know, this is pretty much the only grass that's now seeding. So anyone that's walking around, that if there's a grass that's seeding, then your chances are it's probably Gamba.
Yeah, it's an ongoing need for people to learn new stuff, and I think clearly, as we've heard today, there's been a huge effort in terms of getting information out there. There's more information on the way, and yeah, it's just an ongoing challenge. Rather than the question of identifying Gamba grass, the question of killing Gamba grass, there's been quite a bit of discussion about the use of vinegar in recent times, and I guess Denise Goodfellow is one person who's particularly, I've heard Denise talk about it, and I've seen her demonstrating at a field day at Casuarina Coastal Reserve. Has any of the panel actually got any comment or information about the effectiveness of vinegar as a control mechanism for Gamba, please?
Did those plants come back, Dave?
Well, the ones I saw on at Casuarina, no, they didn't. But that was just such a small. I mean, it's just 3 or 4 plants, and you know, it was no controlled experiment. So yeah, you couldn't really conclude anything. But when I went back a few months later, it actually looked as though they'd died. But it was a combined thing of trampling them and spreading vinegar on them. Yeah. Okay. Look, let's skip off that because we're not getting any particular insights on that. There's just such a range of activities going on. It's just fantastic. Clearly, we've still got challenges about some really basic stuff like identifying. So for some people, identifying plants, but even there's progress being made on that too. And so I look forward to Roni's hearing the outcome of what Roni was talking about of this new identification guide from Weed Management branch. Okay, look, to finish up the webinar this afternoon, I would just like to, 2 things actually. I'd like to just re-mention that there's the Gamba Grass Community Forum coming up, and perhaps Susanne, do you just want to say anything further about that? So that's on the 10th of April.
Yeah, sure. So the point of the community forum is really to get successes shared, but also collect a lot of those ideas, like the vinegar ideas and things that people are doing within their own scale on their own property that they know works for them, and maybe nobody else even knows about that. So, no idea is too stupid probably when it comes to Gamba grass, and I just want to get those ideas into one spot, and then some of them potentially could go for further research. Maybe they get sent along, maybe Nat can do something with them, or somebody else. Some of them probably need to go to the best practice manual if those are things that there's a lot of agreement, like we really need to have case studies and we need to have good examples of how this can be used or rolled out, and what the costs are and what the benefits are, and what situation this particular scenario suits. We can capture some really good information if we can get people together. But also, a lot of the time, attention seems to go quite negatively onto Gamba, yet I know people do have success. And success it can be genuine success too. So we've just got to get the attention back to what is possible sometimes, I think. So that's it's free to attend. I just do need people registering for catering purposes and COVID purposes. It's at Livingstone Reserve on April 10th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. It's intended for land managers, but anybody who's dealing with Gamba grass is absolutely welcome to attend. There's a lot of knowledge, I think, in the top end. So we just need to get that knowledge into one spot. People do leave sometimes and take their knowledge with them. So let's get it written down somehow and figure out what to do with it.
we've actually heard about a whole lot of successes today as well. So yeah, so well done on everybody on your efforts, and thank you for your contributions today. And yeah, look, let's finish up with a very short audio visual, basically a little video, some work going on Casuarina Coastal Reserve.
This morning we've been out as a kick-off event for the Adoptaspot program, which is a new program being run by Parks and Wildlife in the Northern Territory. We've been in the middle of Casuarina Coastal Reserve, out there practicing our use of the Avenza and Weedmate apps and finding some gamba. It's been a very useful morning. We grubbed out a bit of gamba.
The Adoptaspot program's a collaboration between Parks and Wildlife and dedicated members of the local community, aim to ultimately remove gamba from the reserve.
There's a real chance for me to actually contribute to removing these outlying Gamba grass plants in the reserve. Look after this backyard, which is just a place I love to come and visit and enjoy the bush.
Volunteers of Adoptaspot will be dealing with the outliers, the satellite plants, while Gamba Army and Parks and Wildlife Rangers will be busy on the major infestations. So together, this is a really good way to reduce the fire risks in Casuarina Coastal Reserve.
And we're seeing it as a trial, that might be a program that can be rolled out across the territory. So the hard work that people are doing now can ultimately help the rest of the territory in the future.